All right, traders. I'm here with Roger. Roger is one of the owners of Nerd Store and Dr. Volt's, and he is probably one of the foremost experts, certainly my go-to guy when it comes to foreign comic books. So we're going to introduce you to Roger. We're going to talk about some really cool foreign books that he has, some stuff that we're running through the press, and kind of that end of things. So if we ever have questions from out there in the community about foreign books, we've got our own expert right here that we can tap for this kind of knowledge.
The truth is, I just have a lot of experts that I rely on. So.
Well, that's kind of how it works, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So I don't have to be an expert in foreign comics. I just have to know
someone who knows someone. Yep.
Yeah, if I want to see something cool in a foreign market, I pop on over to your house and you blow me away with a bunch of books, and I go there leaving thinking, man, I'm never going to own that cool thing. So, and we've been friends for 2-3 years now.
Yeah.
And like every time I head over to your house, it's always something cool, something different, and it's blowing me away. So I've got this one up. This is a Heavy Metal issue 273 Comics Pro. It's not a foreign book, but it is going home with me tonight. Big Kirby fan. So what's the story with that?
Basically, Comics Pro is a comic book organization where it gets a lot of the more influential retailers together every year to discuss things with publishers, and a lot of the policy and a lot of what you see in the comic book industry and market is decided in that room. And what this is they do a series of exclusive covers that are only for the members that attend those events.
Oh, okay.
And this is one of the ones that they did, I want to say 2, maybe 3 years ago at their show, and we happened to attend that show. So
right on. So it's a beautiful Kirby, and you're not getting new Kirby anywhere.
No.
So
and they tend to be very low printed,
yeah.
Usually 150 copies range on any of the Comics Pro stuff.
Yeah, so as y'all know, I'm extremely cheap when it comes to buying books, and I'm walking home with a $170 book today. So it's got to be kind of a big deal when you think in those terms. So I got a pile of some of the really cool foreign stuff, and to me, the foreign market is as much about the stories behind these books.
Absolutely, yeah.
And how they come to market in the strangest kind of ways.
Yeah, I mean, for me, collecting comic books, the reason you want a first print, the reason you want the original and not just something that you can read as a reprint, is you're collecting the history.
Right.
You're collecting the stories, you're collecting the influence on pop culture, and that is no different in the foreign market. These introduce them into entirely new areas of people. There are a lot of times unique pop culture to those areas that are reflected within those books that you get. So you get things that you just can't get in the English books, alternative covers, sometimes different. I mean, there's one of my favorite countries to collect is Indonesia, because there's so much crazy bootleg stuff out there that's all original, which they hired very talented Indonesian artists in many cases to recreate stories. You have original Indonesian characters interacting with Spider-Man and new villains and all this kind of stuff. There's the non-canon Mexican stuff. You get a lot of that stuff too that are, those are a little different because those were actually approved by Marvel to be produced. The Japanese Playboys that I had you do for me that.
Right.
You have a full centerfold right here and John Romita's Spider-Man on the page right next to it. And they allowed that because they were like, nobody will ever know. It was pre-internet age, and they thought no one would ever find out, and yet here we are. And we all know now. There's manga inside Japanese Playboys that's extremely inappropriate Star Wars manga that was completely branded and licensed to Star Wars. They allowed them to do it because they didn't care in that market. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff.
That stuff that would make the mouse blush.
Oh,
it was pretty interesting. I was thumbing through that. I'm like, wow, what the heck is this?
Yeah. Luke and Leia have a very inappropriate relationship given their blood relation.
Yeah. So very cool stuff, and I can't remember. It was like the Avengers with Batman and Superman.
Yeah, that's especially in the Indonesian stuff. And a lot of the what's technically bootleg, because that was not approved, but they were small enough markets, they knew it was happening and they allowed it to happen and continue. And so you have crossovers. I mean, there was one, I have a Spider-Man book that features the Muppets for no apparent reason.
Yeah, I remember that one.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of that stuff. And on the note of Indonesia, I brought some cool stuff that you've not even seen yet. This is brand new arrivals. So we'll get to intro this to you. This is original art from some of these bootlegged Indonesian books. So this one is from 1981.
Oh, wow.
Throw it up there.
Let me, right Thin that up a little bit. Wow.
That's a Captain America page. You can see Red Skull featured quite prominently on there. That is this, and so that's the title page. I actually have the entire issue of internal art.
Oh wow!
From that entire bootlegged Indonesian issue. So this is all of it. You have, Red Skull here with the Cosmic Cube.
Wow, that's super cool.
Cap makes his appearance here.
Is this all original art?
This is original art.
Wow.
These are the original drawings from I believe it was 81 is what it says on. Yep. And the thing I love about it is you can see it, and you can see the influence. Like, I'll show you guys a little closer. You can see the influence of the art for the region in the area, but still very recognizable characters.
Right.
And so it really drives home.
Well, I was just thinking how Kirby-esque, like your...
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they took a lot of influence from the American artists and then kind of redid with their own flair, and it creates this whole new dimension of things that they are able to do. Here's another one right here, a Superman book. This one is from 1980. And again, you got the pinup girl with Superman in the back.
Wow.
So another very unique piece.
It's almost like a James Bond movie poster.
Yeah. Well, if you look at it, a lot of the stuff actually from Indonesia specifically has a very James Bond-esque feel to it, because they were very influenced by 70s, late 70s action movies from America. Now they're bringing this in, and so that's kind of, they associated them together, and so it all has this aesthetic that's very similar to that action movie aesthetic, which is very different from what the American comics were producing at the time.
Oh, that's super cool. That's interesting how that influence in their region, like, kind of changed the artwork.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's my favorite thing about it, and you see that all through. I mean, I don't have this one here, but one of my other favorites is there's a Mexican printing of FF52, the first Black Panther, and on the cover, for some reason, there's somebody in a boardroom who decided, you know what, this will sell better if we give him a cowl like Batman, where his face is exposed.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And on the cover, he's a white guy, and so Tikal he looks like Batman. But inside, it's the same internal art.
Right.
But for on the color, they're like, oh, we can sell this book better if we just make him a white guy on the cover, And so there's some of that kind of stuff that's just weird, quirky things, and these were all deliberate decisions. I have a Norwegian Fantastic Four #1 where everything's recolored. The big villain on the front's purple. It's not.
Right.
And it's all because they were like, no, this is a kid's book; it needs bright colors. And so they did it intentionally to try and generate more sales in their region, and creates all these different variances and some of the crazy stuff that you see. And I think I actually have an example of that in here. Yeah, so that's one of the things that the Australian Newton comics are really famous for. This is not a particularly high-grade copy, but you can see Hulk 181, and you can see how they really spruced up the colors and brought home that, made it very kid-appealing to try and sell to that market a little stronger.
Yeah, and this was at a time when comic books were really more for young adults in the States, and they're marketing the exact same stories to children overseas.
Yep. And many times it did not work, because a lot of these, one of the tricks with these is a lot of times these books really failed in the markets they were in. And so one of the things that makes them so sought after and so hard to find is they were not distributed for very long, because they were not commercial successes in many cases. And so you also had a lack of bag and board culture. They were very looked down upon for a long time. I mean, even up until a few years ago, major collectors weren't going after foreign as much as you see even now. And they're still not now as much as I think they will in 5 or 10 years. And so these things just weren't preserved. And so even though they were originally printed in much lower numbers, they were also take care of less than the American equivalent. And so you see so few of these, especially in high grade, but I mean, honestly, so few that even exist.
And we discuss that a lot, because I do all the pressing and cleaning for you. And one thing I've noticed, the Filipino stuff is often in really poor shape, very dirty, and like there's probably not been a bag and board in the Philippines.
I don't even know if there is still. Yeah. Well, and some of like Norwegian books and Danish books, they haven't printed. They've been printing in English for a long time now, because most of the population there speaks English, and it's easier for them. So during the time that they were actually printing in that language, most of that time there was no bags and boards available. There was none of that available. So yeah, again, most similar situation. If you find them, they're stacked in somebody's closet and have been for 30 years as a forgotten about, throwaway piece most of the time. And so most of them didn't survive, and the ones that do tend to be pretty trashed.
And I do find that a lot of the English versions, so your Australian, British, South African, a lot of their American books that were printed in English there are in much better shape.
I think certainly Great Britain and Canada, I would agree. Australia is actually surprisingly difficult to find good shape.
The pre-decimal stuff is really tough.
Yeah, the earlier big key stuff for sure. I mean, even now, I import some key issues, like modern key issues from Brazil, like Ultimate Fallout 4 or Spider-Verse 2 from Brazil and Mexico, and even now getting those, even a year or two after they release, is real tough to get them in good shape. Because, I mean, I have an Ultimate Fallout 4 that literally somebody just put a piece of paper on and wrote a note. And so it's just carved into the cover, like that kind of activity and behavior is still really common in those regions. And so even now, they're just not being protected the way that American books are.
Now, over the past couple of years that I've been doing this with you, one of the most common books I think that I've seen is this one.
It's one of the more sought after.
ASM 129.
For people that are trying to create a cover set, that I'd say that one and Spider-Man 300 are probably the two most sought after sets.
There have been a lot of 300s.
Yeah.
The Gwen Stacy wedding cover.
Yeah, the Mexican are you referring to?
Yes, the
Mexican,
yeah. Yeah, and there's a real interesting story with that I've told a lot of people, and that's the one where, and if you could just kind of run through it real quick, how the American version, the English version of that book came about.
Yeah, so effectively, for those who don't know the story of the non-canon Mexican run of Spider-Man, La Prensa Press was publishing Spider-Man in Mexico. They weren't a particularly large company, and Spider-Man was their flagship. That's what they sold the best. And they felt that Gwen Stacy was the reason they sold those books the best, like she was their driver. And so when they got issue 121 to go to print, and they see that she's killed, they refused to print. They printed issue 102, and I actually have a copy of issue 102, second appearance of Morbius, and it says 121 in the cover. So they numbered it 121, but it's just an issue 102. And they went to Marvel and said, hey, we can't afford to do this. It's going to alienate too many readers. We don't have the reader base you do. We can't afford to do this. Marvel gave them permission to hire their own artist-writer team and start their own story. And so the next issue, you have Spider-Man on the cover. He's holding Gwen in his hands. She's sopping wet, and he's rescued her, and it goes from there. And I mean, it's crazy stuff with aliens, and Vampirella comes in at one point, and I mean, there's a lot of just off the wall stuff that they do, and a lot of it was very inspired, as you've noticed sometimes, by the art in the American versions. Like a lot of it was basically redraws of panels, and then they fill in their own stuff with American panels redrawn in some spaces and create their own stories. And so there's a lot of that you can kind of, as you thumb through, you can kind of detect. But anyway, some fans decided they wanted to make these things more available, specifically the wedding issue, because that's kind of the big famous one that went nuts on Twitter and went viral. And so they reprinted it initially because they were German. The people that did this were printed initially in German, and they later decided to print it in English. But I'm not sure the details of exactly what happened. I just know that if you didn't pre-order, you didn't get it, because they immediately said no one else is getting this book, and it seemed like they may have gotten some sort of notification that they weren't allowed to do this.
Right.
And so very few copies got out. And so there is an English translated version out there, but it's quite scarce.
Right. And it was taken from scans of a Spanish version of the book, and they deleted the words in the word bubbles and just put
of the Mexican version.
So when they scanned it in, they used those scans to build the new book.
And the copy that they took the scans of happens to be a copy that I own in my personal collection.
Right.
So that's a nice, that's a
feather in the hat.
Yeah, it was just a coincidence. I picked it up. They had sold it to somebody. I picked it up from that guy.
And it's really interesting.
They sold it to him
because he showed me this book, and you compare the two side by side, and it's a photocopy. So it's like got all the grit, because the book was not in great condition when they scanned it in.
No, it was not. Yeah, it's got all the same bends and folds and chips, and you can pretty well track that it's the same copy.
So very, very cool. And we've seen, we don't even know what the ceiling is on this book at this point. you sold a few for some
Of
astronomical
the English
of the
editions,
English.
yeah, I think we were selling them. So we opened it at Emerald City Comic Con, and I had no idea where to price these things. And I think the first day we were out there, we were selling them I was like, put them up at 150, see if anyone buys them. They was our best seller that day and sold out almost immediately. I'm like, all right, try them at 250, and by the end of the show, we were selling them I think 300 or 350 if I recall.
Right.
And they were still selling at that price. So I have no idea where, people are willing to go for those at this point. But
right.
I've had multiple verified sales in the $300 range on the English version. Which is cheap compared to what you would pay for a legitimate, Mexican
right.
edition. I recently floated an offer of $5,000 out for a low grade Mexican edition and couldn't find one.
Wow.
At that price. So
that's crazy,
and that's significantly higher than it was just a few years ago. I mean, when you have the scarcity of some of these, I mean, there are some books in here there's a few dozen copies to exist. So the market is going to be whatever someone's going to pay for it, and you're going to have to put out an offer that somebody can't refuse that wants it, because pretty much they've all landed in someone's personal collection by now. There's none in circulation. There are none of them sitting in dealers. They're in someone's personal collection at this point, and if you want to shake it loose, you're going to have to make an offer that they can't turn down.
Right. And I know one thing that interests you. Try to be careful though, if I can have bags on. So there's the alternate art on some of these books. This one you said was Egyptian?
Arabic, actually.
Arabic.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's basically the same cover, but with alternate coloring on that one.
That's a very common, for whatever reason, for them to alternate the covers. You also get instances where they were given black and white scans initially, and you can tell because the characters are all different colors, or the coloring, the coloration is just off from the American version. It's very similar. Spain was really famous. Do you have that Nova one? Spanish
no,
Nova
I think we
one.
left that over.
I say, here's a good example of the Spanish one. Spain was really famous for taking books and redrawing the covers and just doing their own unique things. So, like, here's a Black Panther one, Spanish Black Panther one.
Oh wow.
There's a great Hulk 181. The Spanish Hulk 181 cover is the best of all the Hulk 181 covers. They redraw Wolverine's suit as a white and gold version of his suit, and it looks incredible. Also, their Moon Knight, their Werewolf by Night 32 in Spanish edition is unbelievably cool.
Yeah.
Frankly, way cooler than the English edition for the same cover. It is an unbelievably cool art piece. It's a very cool action pose, like the shot and like the way it's framed up, and it's head on with Moon Knight instead of from the side. It's a very cool looking piece. It's one of the few that I regrettably do not have of the ones I'm looking for the Spanish editions, and wish I would have picked them up when I had a chance a couple years ago, because they've gone 5 times the price now if I want to find one.
And then we've got Captain America with short shorts.
Yeah, this is one of my favorites. So this is during the fall of the USSR, effectively, and I don't know the exact story on this one. I've kind of read some theories. I got some friends that might be able to chime in and help out with this, but effectively they recolored this to be more Soviet friendly. And so they took the original, Kirby art, and they redrew and recolored it to be basically Commie Captain America. And so, this is what I talk about when you say you have cultural influences and stuff that come into mind. This is also, so my friend Matthew, who's taught me a lot of what I know about this stuff, and I used to pick his brain a lot, he coined a term that I really like, and it's called conflict books. And these are books that have survived massive social upheaval and conflict. And this is one of them. Like, this book has survived times. One of the reasons that these particular books are so hard to find is there were major cities that were cut off from power and gas. I mean, they burned these things to create heat for them in the winter. Like, these are books that survived extreme conditions and social upheaval and stuff that we just can't relate to in the U.S. market, and somehow still came out and survived. So these books, the odds of them surviving was already very low. And I think it adds a little bit extra to that book, knowing that it kind of went through all that, and now it's here.
Yeah, it's really cool. That's really cool. So, one thing that I think is really cool, you are actively, like, you've got connections all over the world at this
Working
point.
on it, yeah.
And you're actively doing everything you can to bring these to market in the U.S. for our U.S. collectors, and it's a portion of the market that's growing by leaps and bounds.
It's crazy. I mean,
it's been insane.
Even with all the, hubbub people have made recently about how the comic spike we saw last year was largely artificial and it settled down, and people like to use the word crash, and I have my own thoughts on that because it's not a crash, it's just a market correction. But but these have not been affected by that. I mean, the international editions of these books have gone even after everything softened and went down. These are not softening or going down. These are, I mean, these in a lot of ways are like a major key silver or gold-ish issue, the blue chip stuff, because the reason that stuff is what it is because the demand outpaces the supply by such a large margin that it almost doesn't matter what you price it at. And with a lot of these, with how scarce they are, it's a very similar thing because the supply is so low. It does not take a big spike in demand to make a huge spike in the market.
Right. And so I was actually going someplace else with that, but real quick, I wanted to hit on something, and I had a different mindset, and you had mentioned the crash, and I know this is a little off the topic that we're sitting down here to discuss, but you said something to me about a year and a half ago that really resonated. We were discussing the crash and all that kind of stuff, and you said to me that, because you're a numbers guy, you own a business, you do this for a living, and you work numbers all the time, and you were going over the numbers with me as far as how many collectors there are in the market compared to print runs, comparing it to the 90s, and why you don't feel that there's going to be a crash.
Yeah, not a true crash.
Right.
And if you go back to that conversation, I did say I believe there would be a market correction.
Right.
And I think that's what we're saying now. But if you look, people like to act like, this market's inflated. If you look at anywhere, when you take into account both the print runs being, at best we're seeing 8 to 10% of the large books in the 90s, compared to like a Spawn one or a Jim Lee X-Men one. Our best books are hitting 10% that volume, if that. And then you add into the fact that the population has increased by a very significant margin, and these characters are much more in the public zeitgeist, and so the awareness of these characters is a higher percentage of that public margin. We're a long ways.
And the international market, because it flows both ways.
Yeah. You have a developed international market now that has a great. I mean, there's a lot of the connections I've made in these different countries bringing in these international comics that are regularly importing from the United States. U.S. versions for their collections, which was not an element that was in play at that time at all. So you're opening yourself up to major markets, China, India, Australia, England, obviously, these other areas that are far more at play now than they ever were.
Well, and a lot more English speakers in some of these other nations that weren't there 20 years ago.
Yeah, which is one of the reasons that modern keys are so rare in an international edition, is because most of the time you're now just seeing the English imports that are being sold. They're not doing their own editions. They're just selling the English versions in most of these markets because it's such a prevalent language.
And I do see that the market correction that we're seeing now is books are not crashing because they're not going into quarter bins.
No.
Like, and a lot of these cases, Batman 89 is not going into a quarter bin. It's still a $25, $30 book.
It's just where it should have been to begin with.
Yes. And I think we're seeing that the bro collectors are kind of getting out of it. They're moving back to sports cards or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, you look at what's most effective. And frankly, you've seen it in everything. We've seen it in crypto. We've seen it in Pokemon. We've seen it in sports cards. It's been everything. It was a collector's bubble in general. If you were paying attention, I mean, even Funko saw the same correction. Like, it's everything saw this same correction. And people have less free time and money now, so that kind of drove that. And we saw that. I mean, you had to have seen that coming if you really looked at it, objectively. But if you look at what's most effective, your Hulk 21s, your giant size X-Men's, your Detectives 27s, that stuff's not really effective. That stuff's still setting records every time it goes to market. So the stuff that's most effective is the stuff that was easy for your common person to just get in and play with a few $100, and variants were heavily affected, highly saturated, modern keys, like that kind of stuff. Those were where the most heavily affected portions were, which doesn't lead me to believe there's an instability in the market itself, because your bedrock of the market, the foundation, is still really solid.
Right. So yeah, that's just an interesting take that you had on it, and I've actually repeated that to a lot of people. Everybody that asks me, that's my go-to. It's like my buddy Roger told me, and I think I think you have a unique perspective on that, being a shop owner and being so heavily into the foreign market.
Yeah,
I think
for sure.
That really gives you a unique perspective on that portion of our hobby. Okay, so as I was saying, you're doing everything you can to bring those to market, these books to market. And I know that a lot of people that watch this, a lot of my followers are constantly asking me, where can I get more of those cool books? And this isn't even a drop in the bucket of what you have.
No.
Of course, if you're in Utah, you're at the Nerd Store. Your store, Dr. Volt, carries
We carry
not to the extent, because most of it's warehoused here. But for people in Georgia, where are they going to be able to get a hold of some of this?
So right now, we don't have a great solution. We're in the middle of moving our store and expanding, and that's really taken up all of our bandwidth. But when we get to that move and we get to that portion, we do plan on doing some version of live stream sales, whether it's through Facebook or whatnot, or another app. So we're looking into some options there. We will have that coming. Certainly follow us on social media, Facebook or Instagram under the Nerd Store. It's the one in Utah, not the one in Colorado, although follow them. They're good people too. But we'll keep that updated when we go. We do have a little bit on nerdstoreutah.com. We have some Turkish stuff, some modern stuff up there. We probably will be posting some Russian stuff up there fairly soon, which has gotten
those Ultimate Fallouts
much harder to get recently than it used to be. One, I think I have some Amazing Spider-Man 300 and 361 Turkish, some Hulk 181s, X-Men 4. I think I have a few others, so I've got some good stuff on the Turkish or on the Russian front. I mean, so I have some of that. We have some other Turkish stuff coming up that I'm really excited about that I can't announce yet, but there's some cool stuff coming. Some very cool stuff, actually.
Very cool stuff.
Yeah, I'm really excited about some of the projects I have coming with those. So yeah, we have all that coming. Basic thing, follow us on social media. We're in a little bit of a flux right now, offering this to out-of-state customers, but we do plan on it. It is in the wheelhouse. It is something we're working towards, and we will be doing some more.
And if you're watching this, if you're following me on social media, reach out to me, because if we have enough interest, I will make Roger go pull up a bunch of books, and we'll do a live sell on YouTube or something.
Yeah, totally.
We'll get these books in your hands.
Yeah, totally. Okay. And I'll bring out some of the
bangers.
Yeah, maybe some of the ones I'm not looking to sell, but I can at least show some cool stuff off.
All right. Okay, so Nerd Store Utah?
Nerdstoreutah.com for the website, and then facebook.com/nerdstoreut.
Okay.
And also Dr. Volts on Facebook. And then I'm not sure how to directly access the Instagram, but if you pull up Nerd Store, it's the one with our little N logo on. It's just an N, and it's a simple little, looks like a battle axe.
And they also do, of course, American Keys, current books, and they do store exclusives. We
actually have a exclusive for the new Dog Days coming out. We just finalized the details on for Stray Dogs. So I don't know if you saw, there was the 2 covers for Stray Dogs that ended up somebody solicited, sold, and then bailed with the money.
Oh yeah,
I don't know, the Brightburn and House of Wax.
Right.
The same shop went up and then just bailed. I don't know exactly the details. I just know that they were never filled. The artists were never paid, and so basically we stepped in and we're like, people want these covers. We want to make sure the artists get paid. So we stepped in and took on the project as a trade paperback exclusive.
Right on.
We're launching them as close to cover price as we can. It's going to be barely over cover price. I don't think we have an exact yet for me to announce, but I think we're leaning in the $20 range, which I think covers 18.
I got to have those on my hold.
You're effectively paying cover price for these really cool covers, and we really did that because we just wanted to make sure that this project happened for the people that wanted the covers, and we're disappointed they didn't get them, and so that we could get some money into the artists' pockets, because we felt like it was wrong that they lost out. So we will. We haven't announced that publicly. This is now our announcement. So.
Right on. There
you go.
Cool. All right. So make sure you like and subscribe, follow us, share, do all that good stuff. And if you're interested in these foreign books, you can hit up the Nerd Store at their social media and all over, or shoot me a message. We'll make sure we get them in your hand. All right. Later, traders.